Tell me a little bit about your lab. What kind of research are you doing there?
So our lab is a neuroeconomics lab. What we do are studies of how people make decisions, in most cases with some, not only a measurement of decision behavior, but of the processes that lead to that behavior. So a very common technique we use is functional MRI, which is a technique that takes standard MRI scanners and measures changes in blood oxygenation in the brain at really second-to-second time points. So we can look inside the human brain in a way that's completely non-invasive. There's no risk to people whatsoever. It's basically no more electrical energy than a light source coming at you, and that technique allows us to pull out changes in parts of the brain that go with some aspect of decision making. So we can look at what brain regions might be tracking value, or tracking risk, or tracking the time until you get a reward, or how much another person's opinion shapes your decisions, and so forth. We also use techniques like measuring brain waves. This is a shorthand for saying the electrical signals that sort of come out through our scalp just from the natural electrical activity of neurons. And we also measure how people look. Like if you're watching an advertising or a web page, you may be moving your eyes from different places on that page, and that's not random. You're seeking out information and trying to acquire it, and the way in which you seek out that information tells us something about your motivations and how you're using that information. But across all these, it's always trying to get a sense of what's the process that leads to a behavior, and not just measure behavior itself.
There's a thing that I'm kind of gleaning from this, is that when you're presenting information, you're presenting it as a story of a treasure hunt.
Yep.
And the way I've seen a lot of people is that I'm going to basically do a kind of a data dump.
Yep. Yeah, I think in the best cases, what a presenter does is something like that, treasure hunt. It's at the end, there's a feeling of reward. It's like, I journeyed to a place, I got here, I worked hard to get here, but now I have this big reward. It's a wonderful metaphor to think about. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you have to structure presentations in a way that the rewards are intermittent. So in my own speaking, I'll often begin with stories and try to tell a very evocative story. And that story, especially that story, is something that people can relate to. It's physical. They can put themselves in the story, imagine themselves affected by the story. Then that not only keeps their arousal up, they're engaged, but it really emphasizes why this matters. So when we talk about, I teach a class in neuroethics, and we talk about frontal lobotomy at one point. And that we do not just because the frontal lobes are important, but because there are horrible and strange stories we can't even imagine today about people who had lobotomies some decades ago. And in telling their stories as people, the students are rapt. This is amazing stuff. But then they realize that these neuroscience concepts and learning about neuroscience matters to them. That what scientists and doctors didn't know 7 decades ago changed tens of thousands of people's lives because they got a medical treatment that turned out to be inappropriate. It matters to know the neuroscience. And as soon as you convince them that there is, to keep the metaphor, there is some treasure out there, there's some reason for doing all this, then they tend to be more engaged.